Coming up later in the podcast, real magic is when, despite 5 years of IVF treatment and being diagnosed with cancer while pregnant, his wife gave birth to their daughter, Isabella. And I swear, the audience just melts. Magicians, by their very nature, tend to be the odd one out. We're the social rejects who didn't do particularly well in sports and athletics as children, choosing instead to spend copious amounts of time practicing card moves in front of the mirror and reading magic books. Ah, those were the days. This desire to get one over on people becomes a habit that many magicians never escape. We live in a world where Uri Geller attempted to convince the populace that he actually had telekinetic powers, when in reality, he was using methods that any magician worth their salt would recognize. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. I am your host, Dara, and you're very welcome to the show. Today's topic is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that you get something out of it. The question is magic dishonest? And needless to say, this is one of the things that plagues magic. It's the idea that magicians are just trying to fool people. This conceptualization comes with the connotation of deception, right? Dishonesty. And to a certain extent, deception is involved. I mean, the magician is quite literally doing something that misleads and deceives. To take an example, the coin goes in the hand, or so the spectator thinks. What they don't realize is that the magician has mastered the technique of making it look like they placed the coin in their hand, when in reality it went up the sleeve or it was palmed away in the one remaining supposedly empty hand. So yes, this is to one extent or another an example of dishonesty or deception. The lie, quote unquote, is the magician's suggestion, though non-verbal, that the coin is in the hand, and this, of course, is untrue. Ergo, magic is dishonest. Case closed, right? Sounds simple. And yet, I disagree entirely. Why? Well, the first thing to point out is the fact that all art forms actually involve deception, and yet their reputations aren't defined by it. Actors pretend to be other people, and some are so successful that they manage to change our emotional states. We cry, we tremble with fear, and we laugh along hysterically, and so on. I mean, if and when a performance is effective enough to convince us of the lie that what's happening is real, we really do experience emotional changes as a consequence. Artists, to take another example, I'm talking about classical art, painters and the like, they deceive us with their ability to shade and to make two-dimensional objects appear three-dimensional. Some artists are so good at this that it's difficult to tell the difference between what's real and what's fake. I don't know if you guys have seen this trend on social media, but there's now dozens and dozens, probably hundreds if not thousands of social media posts where it appears, to take a random example, that you're looking at two cans of soda or Coca-Cola or something, right? And then the camera pans left or right to reveal that one of the cans is just a drawing. In other words, the artist has drawn a realistic depiction of a can, so realistic that you can't tell the difference between the real one and the fake one. In other words, our eyes are deceived by the artist. Now, you might suggest that this is an unfair or a cherry-picked example because the presentation is literally designed to fool you, but I don't need this example to make my case, so I'll, just for the sake of argument, I'll give you another one. My favourite painting is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, or more specifically the subsection known as the Creation of Adam. This is the painting where God is extending his finger as Adam reaches back, right? And just think about this image for a second. Can you identify the deception that's at play? At a basic level, the figures in the image appear three-dimensional, which I've already addressed. In other words, your eye is fooled by the artistry and skill of Michelangelo. But even more basic than that is the fact that this is actually just a ceiling with colors on it. Yet we have an experience when we view it. It has emotional weight. Now, you may not have any experience when you look at it, and that's fine, but there might very well be another painting that you do feel something when you look at it. So look, if this example doesn't work for you at an emotional level, that's not the key point, right? By placing colors and brush strokes on a ceiling, the artist is able to make us feel an emotion about something that isn't really there. That's the point here. Again, remember, all any painting is brush strokes on a surface. Molecules of color organized in a pattern. Yet we are fooled into feeling something. We're actually just staring at a wall, and yet the artist has the capacity to incite within us a potentially profound reaction. I mean, I, for one, feel such a feeling when I look at the creation of Adam, not least because God appears to be enveloped in a brain-like shape, which may in fact be Michelangelo's own joke about humans actually creating God and not the other way around. I absolutely love that interpretation of the creation of Adam. It turns out, that Michelangelo is the first graffiti artist. And he graffitied the heart of the actual Christian church itself. But in any case, look, let's suppose that you're still not convinced that other art forms involve just as much deception as magic, and take a look at another example. This might actually be a better example. An actor literally pretends to be someone else for a living, right? And some actors are so damn good at this that they deceive us into reacting in a manner that's conducive to real-life events. One of my favourite films of all time is Gladiator, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Russell Crowe. Now, I'm going to discuss key plot details here, so consider this your spoiler warning, okay? Are you ready? All right. So, one of the most moving scenes in the film is when Russell Crowe's character, Maximus Decimus Meridius, returns home to discover the slaughtered remains of his wife and child. And Russell Crowe's performance here is just absolutely breathtaking. I mean, he won the Oscar that year for Best Actor, and frankly, he deserved it. He collapses in agony and sobs at the feet of his dearly departed love, and I swear to God, every time I watch the movie, my eyes well up and I get a lump in my throat and I just want to burst into tears. And yet, what's happening is a fiction. In reality, Russell Crowe was alive and well, and the actors who played his wife and kid were just pretending too. In reality, they all got paid and went home that evening, and after wrapping filming for that day, they presumably enjoyed their spare time and had a meal, etc., right? The point is, what happens is a fiction, and yet it's so convincing, or to take another term, it's so deceptive that I, at least, react in a fashion that's commensurate with a real-life emotional response to a real-life tragedy, right? Russell Crowe is so effective at faking the behavior of an emotionally decimated human being that I feel for his character even though his performance is a fiction. Guys, if that's not deception, I don't know what is. And yet, I wouldn't agree with defining actors as those whom attempt to fool us into feeling emotions in entirely fictitious circumstances. On the contrary, I think acting is a beautiful art form that has the ability to move us and, to teach us lessons and transport us from our mundane lives to a place of emotional excitement, if not a feeling of poignancy or profound emotional upset, Actors are artists, but again, they're also, for the lack of a better word, pretenders or fakers. It's not real. So to bring this full circle, why do magicians have a reputation reminiscent of a con artist? Why is magic so often viewed as the act of, quote, fooling people? Principally, it's not different to acting. Deception is used to create an emotional response in both art forms. Harry Houdini himself, one of the most iconic magicians of all time, said the following: "A magician is an actor playing the part of a magician." In other words, identical to an actor, a magician is performing in the hope of provoking an emotional response from their audience. In the case of magic, that often takes the form of astonishment or awe. But a magic effect can equally incite fear, anxiety, or upset. If you doubt any of this, you may just not have watched enough magic, but great magic can reduce a spectator or an entire audience to tears if it's delivered correctly, with gravitas and emotional integrity. Consider for a moment, guys, the example of Mark Spellman. And if you don't know who he is, he's a magician whose audition on Britain's Got Talent in 2018 not only secured him the golden buzzer, which indicated his automatic progression to the next phase of the competition, but whose performance moved a nation. Literally moved a nation. He went viral overnight and became a household name in the UK. Spellman begins his performance by getting the judges in turn to complete one action each. And if you don't know the judges, don't worry about it, but I'll just refer to them by first name. So David chooses a crayon, Alicia chooses a card, Amanda mixes a Rubik's Cube, and Simon circles a random word in a book. Up to this point, the routine for any magician watching, at the very least, appears to be nothing more than a traditional prediction effect where the magician proves that they knew all along what each volunteer would do. And for all intents and purposes, this is exactly the kind of routine that Spellman was performing, until he dropped what could only be described as an emotional bomb. After each judge has completed their respective tasks, Spellman returns to the stage and continues with a projected video presentation. He says that if he knew in advance the outcome of the judges' random decisions, that everyone would probably agree that magic was responsible, to which the judges agree. I wouldn't, but that's because I know how this prediction effect works. But leaving that aside, he actually interjects and says no. He says, no, that wouldn't be real magic, which is a real surprise for a magician watching because he's actually cutting through the bullshit to one extent or another. He says, no, that actually wouldn't be real magic. If I knew what you were going to do in advance, that wouldn't be real magic. And he follows up by saying, real magic is when, despite 5 years of IVF treatment and being diagnosed with cancer while pregnant, his wife gave birth to their daughter, Isabella. And I swear, the audience just melts. And I did too. I watched this back in 2018 and I teared up. I'm not kidding. Now look, maybe I'm just a complete emotional wreck, but I tell you, it was very powerful indeed. And of course, Isabella, who's now 2 years of age in the video, is playing with a crayon the same colour that David chose. She sleeps with a cuddly toy that matches the card that Alicia chose. She plays with a Rubik's Cube that matches the order that Amanda mixed it to. And of course, the word Simon circled is revealed to be Isabella's first word. It's just unbelievable and emotionally resonant. It's undeniably poignant and profound. It would, as the old saying goes, bring a tear to a glass eye. So if you're in doubt about the ability of magic to emotionally move people, just as great acting performances have the ability to do, I hope this example has, shifted your intuitions somewhat. So, to summarize thus far, my goal here has been to convince you that art in general is deceptive. Be it the shading of an artist's pencil, the Shakespearean performance of a virtuoso actor, or the pulling of a rabbit out of a hat. Deception is utilized to achieve the end result and provoke in the audience an emotional reaction. And yet, magicians and magic are still plagued with the, oh, you just want to fool me response. But why? I've given this a great deal of thought, and I suspect that there's a few reasons for it, and the first is magicians themselves. We don't do ourselves any favours. Magicians, by their very nature, tend to be the odd one out. We're the social rejects who didn't do particularly well in sports and athletics as children, choosing instead to spend copious amounts of time practicing card moves in front of the mirror and reading magic books. Ah, those were the days before I had any responsibilities. Now, look, this is not to say that all magicians fit into this description, but attend any magic convention and it's hard not to come to this conclusion. And having attended dozens myself, I must admit that the halls are awash with rejects. But I count myself among them, by the way. I mean, when everyone else was playing football or hurling, if you don't know, is a traditional Irish sport, but when everyone else was playing football and hurling when I was a child, I was busy practicing false shuffling and palming. I mean, that's just the truth, right? And if you speak to any magician, it's very often the case, guys. Now, look, perhaps my anecdotal experience has misled me, but I'm not the only one that has this perspective. Derren Brown, the esteemed and talented British mentalist, has acknowledged this same reality, not only about himself, but about others. And he's acknowledged this reality on numerous occasions. I think he refers to his fellow social rejects as, and I quote, dick brains. But look, just because Derren Brown agrees with me doesn't mean I'm right, of course. I just wanted to point out that I'm not the only one who perceives the magic community this way. In any case, magic by its very nature and the performing of it can create within the magician a sense of superiority. It's difficult, for example, for that socially rejected kid not to feel like they got their own back on the popular kids when the popular kids can't figure out how the trick is done, right? There's a sense of victory there, a sense of, quote, owning them, right? And this feeling is difficult to contain. It bleeds out into your body language, your facial expressions, and your tone of voice. I know this because, again, I was such a child. I felt these feelings, guys. I mean, this podcast is rather autobiographical in nature. Fooling the popular kids was a win for me. The alpha male would inevitably challenge me, and I'd fool him twice as bad by saving my crescendo for just such an opportunity. And the girls he was trying to impress would laugh at him while I sat upon Mount Glory, soaking up the attention. And that itself is already rather devious, isn't it? Saving the crescendo to, destroy the person who dares challenge you, right? Reminds me of an Old Testament God. And this is very alluring, guys. And therein lies the problem. This desire to get one over on people becomes a habit that many magicians never escape. Hell, I'm not sure if I ever escaped it. I mean, I'm certainly aware of the phenomenon and its presence in my own psychology, and I do endeavour to keep it in check, but I do have to keep it in check, guys. Otherwise, my magic would just become a masturbatory self-congratulation that incidentally involved the presence of other people. But there are many more magicians, far too many to count, I'm afraid to say, who don't keep this tendency in check, who might as well say to their spectators, "Ha! I fooled you." And it's these performers who are partly responsible for poisoning the name of magic. They've made the "you've been fooled" moment the point of their performance, whereas magic should be about, at least in my view, creating those emotional experiences I referenced earlier when I was discussing Mark Spellman. It should be about connecting with people and sharing in a unique experience. To take the film comparison once again, imagine if Russell Crowe turned to the camera after sobbing at the feet of his dead wife and said, yeah, this isn't even my wife and you're crying. I fooled you. Ha. This, I'm sure you'll agree, would destroy the moment, right? Remember, we're all perfectly aware that we're watching a film. We're all perfectly aware that Russell Crowe is an actor and that we're witnessing a fiction. And yet we can be lured in and compelled to feel very real emotions by allowing our disbelief to subside. And this suspension of disbelief would be shattered if the actor were to draw attention to the fact that the audience has been taken in by a fiction. To draw attention to the fiction, despite the fact that we all know it's a fiction, destroys the magic, or movie magic in this case. And I believe that the exact same principle applies in the art form of magic. To draw attention to the fiction, despite the fact that the audience knows it's a fiction, destroys the magic. And this is precisely what many magicians do. Just as the spectator experiences a profound moment of astonishment, the magician interrupts in one manner or another with the affirmation that they've, quote, fooled you. I mean, sometimes this is expressed verbally, but other times it comes in the form of a sickening facial expression which indicates an obvious sense of superiority and so on. Regardless, guys, it can become clear very quickly that the magician cares more about their ego, skill, and the exhibition of it than the spectator and their experience of the moment. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not condemning the magic community here. I think there's a lot of amazing magicians out there. I'm simply pointing out what I believe to be a key causal factor in the emergence of this impression that magic is primarily about fooling people. And to be clear, I'm not disassociating myself from the creation of this problem. I suspect that many of my performances in the past have directly contributed to the perception that magic is, in one way or another, dishonest and self-congratulatory. But look, I digress. If reason one for this lowly reputation is magicians themselves, who have mismanaged the presentation of magic, reason two is undoubtedly found in the art form itself. Perhaps I'm giving the art of magic a free pass to one extent or another. I mean, I stand by my comparison with other art forms and how deception is a common theme among artists, theatrical or otherwise. But is there something uniquely deceptive about magic that separates it from other performance arts? Some pretty big names in magic seem to think so. As Derren Brown put it in an interview in 2010, and I quote, "Magic has both feet planted in cheap vaudeville and childish posturing, in dishonesty and therefore not in art. The magician cheats, and this truth runs cold through the craft's bloodless veins. The job of a performing magician is, after all, just tricks." End quote. Wow. If Derren Brown is right and magic is just tricks, then perhaps my goal in this podcast is an insurmountable one. I just wish that people could view magic through my eyes, if only for a moment. But I guess Brown is right insofar as magic's historical roots are concerned. One can't deny that magic is associated with things like sorcery, psychic scams, witches, bloody debunked mediums, cheap parlour tricks, and all manner of disreputable, rightfully disliked practices. I mean, we live in a world where Uri Geller attempted to convince the populace that he actually had telekinetic powers, when in reality, he was using methods that any magician worth their salt would recognise. I hope I haven't bursted anybody's bubble there, but yeah, Uri Geller is a fraud. And perhaps the connection to these examples of bogus and supernatural woo has forever tarnished the name of the art that I love. Perhaps it's this history that renders a different connotation for the art of magic compared with other endeavours like acting or painting or what have you. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's not like those other art forms share a lengthy and intimate history with the occult and the supernatural, or at the very least, those connotations certainly don't occur in the minds of the general public, not today anyway. So guys, in closing, I'd like to draw your attention to an idea that I encountered actually at a live event. It was a Sam Harris v Jordan Peterson debate that occurred in the 3 Arena in Dublin, Ireland a few years back. Harris said, and I quote, "Real magic is fake and fake magic is real," end quote. This idea answers the question that the title of this podcast poses. Is magic dishonest? And the answer is, sure, it can be. Remember, real magic is fake. Psychics, mediums, clairvoyants, fortune tellers, and the like, they are all dishonest practitioners who claim to one extent or another that their magical powers are real. But it's all fake. They're just using magicians' tricks. And if you're interested in how they do what they do and you'd like to understand more about their trickery, please feel free to check out my podcasts on psychics. But on the flip side, fake magic performed by people like me who actively tell you while performing that what you're witnessing is simply sleight of hand, misdirection, and showmanship, that magic is ironically real. Not real in the sense that there's actual magical powers on display, but rather real in the sense that it's being accomplished using real verifiable skills such as sleight of hand and misdirection, right? So yes, real magic is dishonest, but fake magic is paradoxically truthful. It asks the audience to suspend their disbelief and to go on a journey that's obviously fictitious. One is told that what they're about to witness is illusory. There's no attempt to hoodwink or persuade the public into believing anything false. But still, even in the context of a truthful presentation like that, the spectre of dishonesty looms in the air. Perhaps the magician Colin Cloud said it best when he pointed out, and I quote, "The reality is, it's tough to engage people with something that is inherently a lie, a falsehood, a non-truth, a deception, an illusion, a trick. The best magicians are able to hide that lie so well, so convincingly, that they capture our imagination, and for that moment, they cause us to believe in real magic. You no longer care if you're being lied to or not. The performer has managed to shut down that analytical part of your brain and allowed the creative and fun side to run amok." End quote. I couldn't agree more with Colin here, and I suspect he's right. Perhaps it is a question of skill. The best magicians cause us to forget ourselves as we get lost in the moment. Perhaps an audience's infatuation with the feeling that they're being deceived is merely evidence of a performer who has failed to capture their imagination. Going back to the acting analogy, this makes a lot of sense. When an actor fails to convince the audience with their performance, people become critical, unhappy, and bored above all else. Bad acting destroys one's immersion, and the magic is lost. So while real magic is dishonest, paradoxically, fake magic is in fact truthful. And that truth, in my view, is very beautiful indeed. In the iconic words of the English writer Alan Moore, "Artists use lies to tell the truth, while politicians use them to cover the truth up." End quote. On that we agree, dear Mr. Moore. On that we agree. Listen, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little rambling of mine, and I hope that my point of view on this topic has shifted your intuitions somewhat. If you did enjoy this podcast, please do drop a like on it. And if you've been enjoying my content more generally, do consider hitting the subscribe button. And don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things Magic Dara as and when my latest videos go live. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.